Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known as the War Hamster. We are going to do our 32nd episode of our review of James Madison's notes from the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. Joining me, as always, my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Great to be here. You know, I pulled out of the mothballs a book that I have not read yet, and because of this show, it's got me wanting to read it. I don't know if it's going to be able to be seen here. It's called The Constitutional Convention, A Narrative History from the Notes of James Madison. I'm actually going to hold on to this book until we're done. Then I'm going to read this. But see, I get to go into it with all of this fresh information, fresh in my mind. For those of you who are like, well, gosh, I've missed the first few episodes. What is it, the 31st, 32nd?
32 today.
32 today. So you got like 31 that you can go back to check out. Might take a while. If you're willing to binge watch some of your series on TV, surely you're willing to binge listen to this or take your time. That's a great thing. They're not going anywhere, but definitely go back to the beginning. Not that I'm saying don't listen to us today. Maybe you could do a little bit of both. Every episode stands on its own.
Yeah, and the reason to do this is if you ever really want to understand the original intent of the Constitution, as opposed to what we're living through today, there's no better way than to read the words of the people that are actually there, what they cared about, what they feared, what they were trying to avoid, what they were trying to construct. And what that really was a federal republic.
And I like the word construct. They weren't creating, they weren't inventing, they were constructing. They went back through history. These guys, their heads were deep into political theory and history and research, and what they were trying to do, or at least most of them, well, I say that lightly, is grab the benefits from different systems throughout history and put them together in a patchwork, in a sense, of something different. So while our system, what has been incorporated into our system, has never been incorporated in such a way before, many of the components existed long before America. And what these gentlemen did during their discussions, their arguments, and what they wound up creating was something truly magnificent. And I'm glad you're here to take that journey with us.
Yeah, it really was magnificent. And the key word you need to be focused on when you go into this, they were trying to find a balance. Mm-hmm. Balance between too much government and not enough government. They're coming from something that was not enough government, but also a balance between big states and small states and future states. And they're trying to find the right balance to make sure everybody was treated, not necessarily fairly, but so everyone had a voice and everyone had their rights secured.
Securing the natural rights. That was their number one focus.
John Locke 101, who I've been reading up on quite a bit, my Locke and my Montague, for an upcoming debate. Hopefully that happens soon with some of these Promethean action people.
Yeah. Well, the book I'm reading right now is called The Evolution of Modern Liberty, and by George L. Sugar. And so we're gonna. So I'm reading about liberty as I talk about liberty, as I write about liberty. One last thing, I just finished yesterday. It's amazing. I do my best writing early in the morning while I'm on vacation. I don't know why. Different venue. Just finished my latest book on the petitioning the government for redress of grievances. And I get into history. I get into the reasons why it's so important. And for you right now, all you need to know is consent of the governed. That's what it's all about. Hopefully that'll be on bookshelves within a week or two. So be on the lookout for it.
What a novel concept.
What a novel concept.
All right. So when we last left off, and I'm going to share my screen without leaving the studio. I always want to hit that button.
I've done it before a few times. Fortunately, if there's somebody in there, it doesn't end anything. It's just you're not there.
All right. We are in the Avalon Project from Yale University, one of the few great things to come out of Yale. and we go through the notes on a day-by-day basis. We left off on Monday, July 9th, and we are going to get to Tuesday, July 10th. The debate right now is they've been talking about apportionment. They've decided that the first branch of the legislature is going to be elected by the people. The second branch is going to be the Senate, and that is going to be one at this point in time, one per state. And this is the whole balance between big states and small states. Should they have an equal voice? You want to protect each from the other. Today, we're going to really get into how many Congress critters should we have? And there's some really fascinating topics that come up here. So, in convention, we're going to start with Rufus King of Massachusetts, big state. He reported from the committee. This is a committee of 5 people that they said, go off, instead of debating this stuff in full convention, come back and give us a report and we'll vote on your recommendations. He says, reported from the committee yesterday appointed that the states at the first meeting of the general legislature should be represented by 65 members in the following proportions. 3 Massachusetts, New Hampshire 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia with 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina with 5, and Georgia with 3. Mr. Rutledge moves that New Hampshire, which I've now renamed since I live here, be reduced from 3 to 2. Her numbers do not entitle her to 3, and it was a poor state. Rutledge, of course.
Real quick, notice the reference, a poorer state. This idea of who has wealth and not, who has money and doesn't, who has industry and doesn't, is still a very big part of the conversation. Go ahead.
Well, Rutledge, who's saying this, is from South Carolina, and I believe he's a pretty big plantation owner, so he was a wealthy man. So This matters. And also from South Carolina, General Pinckney seconds the motion. They're picking on New Hampshire. Rufus King from Massachusetts is going to step into the fray, and he says, New Hampshire has probably more than 120,000 inhabitants and has an extensive country of tolerable fertility. Its inhabitants, therefore, may be expected to increase fast. He remarked that the 4 eastern states, having 800,000 souls, have 1/3 fewer representatives than the 4 southern states, having not more than 700,000 souls, rating the blacks as 5 for 3, 3/5 clause. All right, I'm going to stop there and just pull up the map because we need to reference this. So if you want to comment on what he's saying while I pull that up.
Well, actually, and I was writing down notes about this to keep it in my head, but I'll go ahead and make a reference to this. When we talk about the debate between the large states and the small states, understand also that also encompasses a greater array of what they mean. For the most part, they're talking population, but often geography and wealth is also in the conversation. Now, typically, the state with a larger population has more geography and more wealth, not always. And so it's interesting when you see some of the groupings and some of these discussions, some of these debates, because you'll see certain states, a handful of states, will kind of bounce on one side or the other here and there. And if you look at the large states, while they do have more geography, Maryland really didn't. But they had the population. They had a lot of the wealth. And the southern states, while they had the geography and South Carolina in particular, wealth, they didn't have the population. So sometimes you'll see, like in South Carolina kind of being one of those states, kind of a little bit of interesting movement in the discussions, in the arguments, because large and small could mean a number of things or a combination of things, while population was the primary component.
Yeah, it was interesting they brought up New Hampshire's agriculture says that population is going to grow. So should we just, and then we're going to get into this today, should we just fix the amount of representatives today, or we'll get into this whole argument's going to come up.
Yeah, and you see South Carolina listed with the smaller states, and Maryland with the larger states, and the gap between their populations really isn't a lot, 70,000.
Yeah, it's because they did an arbitrary cutoff of above the line is
Yeah,
250,000. This is a 1790 census, people.
right.
Um, and, they didn't stick with this 65 arbitrary number, but let's keep this map in mind. I'll pull it back up again.
Yeah, and it's also keep in mind what is going on in the north with New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York. Interestingly, when it came to New York as one of the larger states, is there is a region that New York is battling with at this moment called Vermont, who doesn't really like being a part of New York, and they don't want to be a part of New Hampshire. So there's that to keep in mind, and New York. To me, when it comes to New York, it's one of the most fascinating animals in the convention because as today, you've got New York City and then the rest of the state.
Yeah, and remember we talked about protecting the big from the small and the small from the big. It's the same thing statewide. The population centers can't be running things for the whole state.
Right.
And that's what we've become. And that's a big, big problem in many of these blue states.
And usually when people ask me about that, my first response is, well, what do you think about people from the big city telling farmers how to farm?
That's exactly right. All right. Getting back into the notes. So everybody, I can pull this up again if we need to, and we might.
Okay.
All right. Rufus King continues. The Eastern people will advert to these circumstances and be dissatisfied. He believed them to be very desirous of uniting with their Southern brethren, but did not think it prudent to rely so far on that disposition as to subject them to any gross inequality. There's a lot there. These Eastern states, we want to be united with the Southerners, but if we start pushing us around, making sure we don't have enough of a voice, this isn't going to happen. No gross inequality. I bring that up because he's warning against what actually would happen in American history, just the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And it would lead to something some people call the Civil War. He was fully convinced that the question concerning a difference of interest did not lie where it had hitherto been discussed between the great and small states, but between the Southern and the Eastern. How's that for a little bit of foretelling? And again, we've talked about this before, but these are different economies. You have the agrarian South and the mercantilist New England Northeast.
Yeah, and while New England is mercantilist, they're not quite the industrial monstrosity they'll become.
No,
right now, the wealth is coming out of the South. A lot of the trading is coming out of the South. But what's going to eventually happen in American history, long after this, is it's going to get to the point where the finished products are coming out of America. They've got to go north first. They got to go through the industry first. And it was a way for the northern states to kind of add a middleman and kind of cut the South out of the the whole picture. But right now, understand the North does have a lot of strength, a lot of people, a lot of population. There's still a lot of business, but it's for lack of a better way of saying it, it's going to get worse when it comes to, and better overall. But the industry is going to come out of the Northeast.
And they're bickering right now. They understand these are economic questions, right? Even back in 1787, they know this, and that's really what this dispute is about.
In many ways, they see it coming, and also understand something else is going on at the same time. Not that I mean to pull this into this discussion. While all of the states, and a lot of people don't realize this, all of the states have slaves, not necessarily pro-slavery, but have slaves. All of them are slave states at this point. However, in the North, over time already, you're starting to see a reduction of the number of slaves. And in fact, Pennsylvania and the region of Vermont at this point had passed laws, anti-slavery laws. They're the only two states so far to have done so. Well, state and a region to have done so. But the reduction of slave labor in the North is underway. And the reason why this is important is, what does that do? And this is just a reality, is as they industrialize and as they reduce the number of slaves, that puts a lot more of these people to work. It puts a lot more people into the system of making a living, and it enriches the region overall. And so you're starting to see that adjustment happening at this point. They have not, once again, gotten rid of slavery per se, but the process has begun.
And that part of the debate's coming, and so we'll not go into too much depth on it today, but just it's a good point.
Oh yeah,
All right,
well, and slavery, understand, has been an important discussion all along. I mean, going back to the Declaration of Independence. Also, remember, most of these guys are against slavery. They want slavery done away with. Anyway, continue.
For this reason, he had been ready to yield something in the proportion of representatives for the security of the Southern. No principle would justify giving them a majority. They were brought as near an equality as possible. He was not averse to giving them a still greater security, but did not see how it could be done. So that whole paragraph, he says a lot there. Let's get into it. General Pinckney of South Carolina says, the report before it was committed was more favorable to the Southern states than it now stands, meaning the committee just weakened the Southern representation. If they are to form so considerable a minority, and the regulation of trade is to be given to the general government, huge point here, they will be nothing more than overseers for the northern states.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. You know, the North is slowly kind of pushing southern states out of the overall equation here and adding a middleman, and the southern states see it.
Yeah. He did not expect the southern states to be raised to a majority of representatives, but wished them to have something like an equality. At present, by the alterations of the committee in favor of the northern states, they are removed further from it than they were before. One member had indeed been added to Virginia, which he was glad of, as he considered her a southern state. He was glad also that the members of Georgia were increased. This is the 65 was the number they're going for here.
Yeah, and remember, there's a fear here that the larger, more populous states will dominate. So, hey, we just want it to be a little more, balanced. And that's all he's saying here. And they have toyed with some ideas on how to do that already. And this is where the southern states are kind of trying to push towards. Go ahead.
All right. Next to speak is Williamson from North Carolina. He was not for reducing New Hampshire from 3 to 2, but for reducing some others. The Southern interest must be extremely endangered by the present arrangement. The northern states are to have a majority in the first instance and a means of perpetuating it.
Boy, talk about not beating around the bush.
All right, next to speak from New Jersey is Jonathan Dayton. It's important. He observed that the line between the northern and southern interest had been improperly drawn, that Pennsylvania was the dividing state, that there be 6 on each side of her. General Pinckney urged the reduction, dwelt on the superior wealth of the southern states, and insisted on its having its due weight in government.
Remember, as I said earlier, the southern states are the ones that really doing the trading. Industry hadn't developed in the Northeast as it would later. So that's where the real wealth was, at least when it came to individual wealth. Regional wealth, I think already the North was starting to show it. But, these plantation owners, they were wealthy, and they wielded a considerable amount of power in their regions.
Governor Morris, who's from Pennsylvania, says he regretted the turn of the debate. The states, he found, had many representatives on the floor. Few, he fears, were to be deemed the representatives of America. I like that point because you want your representatives in Congress to represent your state and collectively represent the whole.
Well, and this kind of drips of a little bit of this battle that we've seen throughout history of individuality versus collectivism. And so I'm curious where Morris goes here, because he's often a fence sitter that leans towards Hamilton. So we'll see.
He thought the southern states have, by the report, more than their share of representation. Property ought to have its weight, but not all the weight. if the southern states are to supply money, the northern states are to spill their blood. Besides, the probable revenue to be expected from the southern states has been greatly overrated. He was against reducing New Hampshire.
That's actually a very good statement, and it was very pertinent to the argument. And I have a feeling there was a lot of people went, in that convention at that point.
Mr. Randolph was opposed to a reduction of New Hampshire.
There's a lot of those opposed to New Hampshire. Remember, this is a growing region. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, it's also, the very first state constitution, the first in a lot of things that led to all this. New Hampshire's maybe small, but it does deserve an outsized voice at this point in history. Was opposed to a reduction of New Hampshire, not because she had a full title to 3 members, but because it was in his contemplation, 1, to make it the duty instead of leaving it in the discretion of the legislatures to regulate the representation by a periodical census. 2, to require more than a bare majority of votes in the legislature in certain cases, and particularly in commercial cases.
Now, think about this. Why is the number 3 so important? You don't want one person representing a state. You want to be more than one. But if you have 2, if they tie, it doesn't give the state really much of a voice. If you give them 3, then that's a minimal number, but it's not allowing one person to have control, and it gives the opportunity for there to be a majority opinion coming out of a state. Of course, what we know later is these smaller states, what they wind up with is 1 in the House and 2 in the Senate. They get their 3, but it's just in a different way than what they're discussing here. But this number 3 is important. This is the reason why they keep bringing it up. Remember, early on, the number 1 was used a lot, but they've kind of moved away from that because, once again, should one person really represent an entire state in a legislature? But once again, if you have an even number, then there's no majority opinion. And so 3 has become the focus at this point. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of divided votes here at this very convention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, you mean like
New York, maybe?
Yeah. I was thinking Yates and John Lansing versus Hamilton. Yeah.
All right. On the question of reducing New Hampshire from 3 to 2, it passed in the negative. Madison, from this point forward, is going to tell us what passes, so we don't have to count the votes. But it's interesting that the 2 votes that wanted to reduce New Hampshire are North Carolina and South Carolina. Just keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. The two southern states with wealth.
General Pinckney and Mr. Alexander Martin moved that 6 reps instead of 5 be allowed to North Carolina.
All right. You're not going to reduce New Hampshire? Then give us more.
And that passed in the negative with the only 2 voting aye of North Carolina. Oh, 3. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
Yeah, the 3 southern states they hang out with. And it's funny because I can't remember who it was that said earlier they considered Virginia a southern state. And Virginia would ultimately become a southern state when you get to the mid-1800s. But at that point, Virginia really wasn't. It was really a part of the Northern coalition, so to speak. From the colonies' perspective, of course, you had New England, you had the middle colonies, the southern colonies, and they were a part of the colonies. But this battle over whether or not Virginia should be considered a southern state or not is fascinating. But I'll tell you who definitely were, southern states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. They were they 3 peas in a pod. You will see them often voting together, and so that kind of cracked me up when I saw that. Go ahead.
So the same vote to increase the representative of South Carolina, it passes in the negative. This time the ayes are Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. All right, General Pinckney and Mr. Houston moved that Georgia would be allowed 4 instead of 3. This goes to the vote, and it passed in the negative. The ayes were Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
Yeah, the New Jersey earlier, Virginia here kind of surprises me, but go ahead.
All right. Mr. Madison moved that the number allowed to each state should be doubled. a majority of a quorum of 65 members was too small a number to represent the whole inhabitants of the United States. They would not possess enough of the confidence of the people and would be too sparsely taken from the people to bring with them all the local information, key point, which would be frequently wanted.
This just supports an argument that you've made quite a bit, where if a representative represents a smaller number of people, they're going to know more what's going on. They're going to be better representatives, be closer to the people, so on and so forth. But you've got this battle here. It's like when you go golfing. Do you want to hit it straight or you want to hit it far? More often than not, you're not going to get both. And that's kind of the situation here. Do you want, a smaller bureaucracy, or do you want them to, we believe based on his argument, more representative of the people? Because, you can have them, smaller districts, but you're doubling, as he says here, doubling the size. Do you really want that many critters out there playing the bureaucracy game? So it really is a very good question that is even relevant today.
Double the number will not be too great, even with future additions from new states. This is going to be a key point today. Mm-hmm. The additional expense was too inconsiderable to be regarded in so important a case.
So notice it's not just talking about the size of bureaucracy here, but the cost or the expense of a bureaucracy.
And he says it's inconsiderable.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the cost. Let's get the right representation. And as far as the augmentation might be unpopular on that score, the objection was overbalanced by its effect on the hopes of a greater number of the popular candidates.
The popular candidates, that's a reference to the House of Representatives. Popular would be the democratically voted in. We still haven't decided on Senate yet at this point.
Mr. Ellsworth urged the objection and expense, and that the greater number, the more slowly would the business proceed. That's a good thing. And the less probably be decided as it ought at last. He thought that the number of representatives too great in most of the state legislatures, and that a large number was less necessary in the general legislature than in those states, as its business would relate to a few great national objects only.
Ellsworth sounds like he'd be one to support the idea of the term being used in the negative of a do-nothing Congress. I like do-nothing Congresses. What about you?
100%.
But anyway, he would use that term in the derogatory. But anyway.
And he's making the point that this Congress, it's really doesn't have that much power. It's not supposed to be meddling in too many things, and therefore.
And Ellsworth, remember, is a Hamiltonian. He is a big government guy. He believes that these Congress critters should be operating and doing things and meddling and all sort of stuff. That there should be one big national system. And so obviously he's going to want them to have the greater number, the power, and so on and so forth. But the key point here that really outs him, that a large number was less necessary than in the general legislature than in those of the states. I thought that was interesting. When he talks about how the number of representatives is too great in most of the state legislatures. It feels to me like he's saying the states are less important than this federal thing that they need to create. But that's just me.
Mr. Sherman, well, my takeaway is the final sentence. As its business would relate to a few great national objects only. This Congress doesn't have very many duties. We don't need that many Congress critters. We'll see how
they are great. They are great. They are
national things. National objects only. All right. Mr. Sherman would have preferred 50 to 65. Guess he likes round numbers. The great distance they will travel will render their attendance precarious and will make it difficult to prevail on a sufficient number of fit men to undertake the service, meaning people that are fit enough to ride a horse across the country.
And this is a key argument during this convention and for a lot of people, even in the near future. Andrew Jackson, man, from Tennessee, he was riding his horse, I think 2 weeks or something like that to get to Congress. And so one of my favorite lines in the Constitution is that they shall meet at least once per year. And some thought that might even be too great of a number. And this statement was a large reason for that. That is one thing that we have differently today, is distance is not as much of a concern. The expense of distance still is, but the time expense isn't.
Sherman also observed that the expected increase from new states also deserved consideration. So if you fix the number, how you can apportion them, we'll get into that more here. Mr. Gary was for increasing the number beyond 65. The larger the number,
Hamiltonian.
The larger the number, the less the danger of their being corrupted. That's an interesting argument. The people are accustomed to and fond of a numerous representation, and will consider their rights as better secured by it. The danger of excess in the number may be guarded against by fixing a point within which the number shall always be kept, which is what we ended up doing.
So if we have a larger number, they have less danger of being corrupted, but I've heard also the smaller number have less danger of being corrupted. I've looked at city councils and congresses. I have a feeling the number is not the problem.
Yeah, that's a 17th Amendment argument too. Oh, these state legislatures are corrupted, so we need to take the legislature's ability to appoint U.S. senators away from them. And this is what they basically did, was they nationalized the corruption instead of localized it. 17.
All hail democracy, right? All right, go ahead.
Colonel Mason, my boy, George Mason, admitted that the objection drawn from the consideration of expense had both weight in itself and as the people might be affected by it. But he thought it outweighed by the objections against the smallness of the number. 38, he will supposes, as being a majority of 35, form a quorum. Math's off on that, by the way, because 65, the majority is 33, not 38, so I don't know where he got that. 20 will be a majority of 38. This was certainly too small a number to make laws for America.
I'll leave it to you to notice if the math is off.
Sorry, I read it earlier.
Unfortunately, he didn't have a spreadsheet in front of him.
They would neither. I didn't need a spreadsheet to know what 65 divided by 2 is. They would neither bring with them all the necessary information relative to various local interests, nor possess the necessary confidence of the people. After doubling the number, the laws might still be made by so few as almost to be objectionable on that account.
Yeah, he's saying, hey, you're right. They're not going to be doing much. But,
Yeah, but if only 20 people, and using his math, can make a law for the entire country, people aren't going to have any confidence in that. And I think he's correct.
Yeah.
All right, next to speak is Mr. Reed, who is from Delaware. George Reed was in favor of the motion. 2 of the states, Delaware and Rhode Island, would have but a single member if the aggregate number should remain at 65. And in case of accident to either of these, one state would have no representation present to give explanations or informations of its interests or wishes. Goes back to
person should not represent the state, and what? Yeah, it's like, well, you only have one quarterback. He goes down injured. You're in trouble.
The people would not place their confidence in so small a number. He hoped the objects of the general government would be much more numerous than seemed to be expected by some gentlemen, and they would become more and more so. Boy, there's a lot there in that sentence.
Yeah. Once again, numbers, and this is not the end of it. In the Bill of Rights, there's a consideration regarding numbers, and throughout history of this country, the number. But what's fascinated me is whether or not the smaller states have reasonable amount of representation is becoming less and less important as we get into more of a collective way of looking at things. But anyway, go ahead.
He's also making the point that the objects of the general government are going to be Congress is going to have a lot more to do than you think. And that's going to grow over time, which is really
that's true. That doesn't mean it's constitutional, but it's true.
It's a very ominous prediction, and it happened to come true. As to new states, The highest number of reps for the whole might be limited and all danger of excess thereby prevented. Mr. Rutledge opposes the motion. The representatives were too numerous in all the states. The full number allotted to the states may be expected to attend, and the lowest possible quorum should not therefore be considered. The interests of their constituents will urge their attendance too strongly for it to be omitted, and he supposed that the general legislature would not sit more than 6 or 8 weeks in the year.
What he's saying is everybody's saying, well, gosh, if it's only a quorum, you're letting 20 people, based on the math, only 20 people make a decision. He's like, no. It being that low, that's not going to happen. This is important stuff. People are going to make sure they're there. You guys are, going to the lowest common denominator here, expecting the worst. People are they're going to be there. You're not going to be getting this 20. But now, because those people are there, now you got this massive bureaucracy. Do you really want that? That's basically what he's saying.
And everyone seemed to agree because they put that to the vote. And the question of doubling for the number, it passed in the negative 9-2. The two were Virginia and Delaware.
I love the way they talked back then. He didn't say it did not pass. He says it passed in the negative. You got to love the way they talked back then. Anyway, go ahead.
On the question for agreeing to the apportionment of representatives as amended by the last committee, which we read earlier, it passed in the affirmative. The noes were South Carolina and Georgia. Everyone else said aye. So that goes back to this. Where did I have that list? Right here.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be the apportionment, and 65 is going to be the number. Obviously, we know that's not what ended up, so somehow they circled back to it. Okay. Mr. Broome, that's Jacob Broome from Delaware. He gave notice to the House that he had concurred with a reserve to himself of an intention to claim for his state an equal voice in the second branch, which he thought could not be denied after this concession of the small states as to the first branch. That's a very strong statement. Equal representation in the Senate, popular representation in the House. We just conceded to the bigger, more populous states, so now we want this concession back. Mr. Randolph moved as an amendment to the report of the Committee of Five that in order to ascertain the alterations in the population and wealth of the several states, the legislature should be required to cause a census and estimate to be taken within 1 year of its first meeting and every blank years thereafter, and that the legislature arrange the representation accordingly.
That winds up in the Constitution. That blank becomes 10.
Yeah, but
almost the exact wording.
Don't get ahead of it yet, because it's going to be debated here today.
Oh no, I agree. They didn't. The only thing that they really agreed to without much debate was natural born citizen. Everything else got, and then maybe a couple of other things, but for the most part, everything else got a great debate. But it amazes me how that language was, and granted, it comes out of the Virginia plan, but the report from a committee on census, but that language is pretty close to what they wind up with.
Governor Morris, excuse me 1 second. Doug, give me 1 second. I have to go off the camera. I got something in my throat. If you want to entertain people for about a minute,
absolutely. I had that same frog in my throat earlier, but a quick mute, a quick whatever. Anyway, all right. So what I was talking about when it came to the census is fascinating, because look at what they said about the census, that it would ascertain the alterations in population and wealth. So in other words, it wasn't just about numbers for a lot of these folks. The census should pick up on a lot more than that. Now, what's not in here, but what winds up in there as well, was who to count. Do we count everybody who's on the soil in the country? Indians not taxed, not so much. We can get it. We'll get into that much later when they really get deeper into this conversation. But it is interesting that today, the census is all about population and wealth. The wealth is still a key factor in their deliberations and their decision making and their discussions. Anyway, all right, go ahead.
All right, better.
Caught that frog and threw him out the window. Gotcha.
There he is, right here.
I did not expect that. Okay.
I've got a lot of frogs around here. There's another one. There's another one. There's more, but we'll stop there.
But the question is, do they outpopulate the hamsters? Is that what you're saying?
They do, actually.
But the hamster is the biggest and the ruling, so.
That's just true.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Governor Morris opposed it as fettering the legislature too much. Advantage may be taken of it in a time of war or the apprehension of it by new states to extort particular favors. If the mode was to be fixed for taking a census, it might certainly be extremely inconvenient. If unfixed, the legislature may use such a mode as will defeat the object and perpetuate the inequality.
Now stop there for a second. Does he not expect that there would be change? All right, go ahead.
We're saying this legislature, that's represented more by these bigger states, they're going to, if they're going to want, if you give them full authority to change the apportionment, well, they're going to do it to their own advantage. And perpetuate.
But at the same time, there's going to be change, and you have to have a mechanism. So how do you fix the problem?
Well, he was always against such shackles on the legislature. They have been found very pernicious in most of the state constitutions. He dwelt much on the danger of throwing such a preponderancy into the Western scale, suggesting that in time the Western people would outnumber the Atlantic states. He wished, therefore, to put it in the power of the latter, meaning the existing Atlantic states, to keep a majority of votes in their own hands. It was objected, he said, that if the legislatures are left at liberty, they will never readjust the representation. He admitted that this was possible, but he did not think it probable unless the reasons against a revision of it were very urgent, and in this case, it ought not to be done. Boy, he really said a lot there. He's basically pushing for the Atlantic states to always have a greater representation than these new Western states. And I'm going to pull up that map here in a second. It was moved to postpone the proposition of Mr. Randolph in order to take up the following: that the Committee of 11, to whom was referred the report of the Committee of 5 on the subject of representation, be requested to furnish the convention with the principles on which they grounded the report, which was disagreed to. South Carolina only voting in the affirmative. So they're basically saying, okay, we're going to cut it short today, send it back to the committees, come back to us with a new report. And we'll get there in a second, but I have another map I wanted to pull up. And I will share that right now.
And you'll notice every once in a while in the language while he's pulling this up, viz, V-I-Z. And it's kind of a way of saying this is to say, or namely, or specifically. So whenever you see viz, it's just saying, well, specifically, that's basically what they're saying. It's just a short way of saying it, the way they said it. It's comes from Latin.
So these are the current 13 colonies. You notice Maine is still part of Massachusetts up here.
Mm-hmm.
You got a disputed territory between Massachusetts and the colony of New Brunswick, UK, which is interesting. But here we have the unorganized territory, which we've been taught is called the Western Territories. And we also have the other countries not yet mapped out or claimed officially. We got this: Spain has West Florida and East Florida. Georgia would eventually be cut off along this line. Really interesting point here is something called Rupert's Land, disputed. And I wanted to read something on that because it's interesting historically. I'm just going to go to the wiki page on that. Rupert's Land, or Prince Rupert's Land, was a territory in British America after 1783, British North America, based on the Hudson Bay Drainage Basin. The right to sole trade and commerce over Rupert's Land was granted to the Hudson's Bay Company, based at York Factory, effectively giving that company a commercial monopoly over the area. The territory operated for 200 years, from 1670 to 1870, Its namesake was Prince Rupert of the Rhine, who was a nephew of King Charles I and the first governor of the Hudson Bay Company. In December 1821, the Hudson Bay Company monopoly was extended from Rupert's Land to the Pacific coast. So basically, that's the entire area. Starts here, goes all the way to Canada, through Canada to where's now Vancouver. So it's pretty fascinating how they carved that up through a corporate monopoly. I thought that was worth discussing. We don't get much of Canadian history. All right. It's interesting here that Pennsylvania is considered the border state, and you can see that there are 6 states below it: Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North, South Carolina, and Georgia. 6 above. Okay. I thought it was a good, interesting map.
Yeah, and it's interesting, looking at Florida, because originally it was Florida, and then it got broken in east to west Florida because of the dispute between the British and the Spanish. And then, and you'll see throughout history, Florida kind of bouncing back and forth, at least West Florida bouncing back and forth quite a bit. And you'll also see the New Orleans, not the territory, but the city area also bounce back and forth a lot between the Spanish and the French. And because often what would happen is they would change hands, not because of war, but because of treaties. I'll tell you what, I'll give you this if you give me that. And those 2 areas, Western Florida and New Orleans, for whatever reason, were often in the bargaining. Now, when it comes to New Orleans, it was the entrance into the Mississippi River, so it was a very valuable region.
Yeah, and the Mississippi River was the border of all of this territory.
Well, and it's also an important supply route up and down. As things start to move westward for the United States, and it becomes a very important supply route. Also, Mississippi River, attaches to the Ohio River, and you have these other supply routes that you don't need to build canals to take care of, because you can go up the Mississippi. But if Spain isn't letting you use the Mississippi, not letting you enter, and later on France, and earlier France, that could be a concern. So the U.S. interest in New Orleans becomes a very important part of our history as we approach the 19th century. But anyway, go ahead.
Especially militarily, strategically important.
There's that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we're done with Tuesday, July 10th. We're going to go to Wednesday, July 11th. How's that sound?
Okay.
In convention, Mr. Randolph's motion requiring the legislature to take a periodical census for the purpose of redressing inequalities in representation was resumed. Mr. Sherman was against shackling the legislature too much. We ought to choose wise and good men and then confide in them. Oh, if only that could be done, Doug. You see some of these.
The difference between statesmen and professional politicians.
I'm sitting here right across the river from Maine. So like YouTube and other channels think that I need to hear Maine political advertisements. And this clown who's taking over for the Senate run in Maine has got to be one of the dumbest pieces of rock I have ever listened to in my life. And he's just a goofy looking sounding guy. And it's the first time in my life I think I've ever rooted for Susan Collins.
So he's even worse than Plattner, huh?
Well, they basically are cut from the same mold, but he's much less
savvy, much less brain power.
Yeah, and the ads are terrible. I mean,
I've seen the reports, but I have not seen the ads. I pity you, my poor friend.
I've seen 3 of him already today. It's bad. All right, George Mason. This is going to be good. This is this is one of my favorite founders for a reason. The greater difficulty we find in fixing proper rule of representation, the more unwilling ought we to be to throw for the task from ourselves on the general legislature. He did not object to the conjectural ratio which was to prevail in the outset, but considered a revision from time to time according to some permanent and precise standard as essential to fair representation required in the first branch. So you've got to put the rules in place ahead of time so there cannot be any tomfoolery or shenanigans going forward. According to the present population in America, the northern part of it had a right to preponderate, and he could not deny it. But he wished it not to preponderate hereafter when the reason no longer continued. We're saying, yeah, you got more people today, but if that's not the case in the future, you shouldn't have more power permanently, which is what basically Governor Morris.
Which is a good point. And like I said earlier, do you not think things are going to change? Things will, and it should be adjusted. But should it be? But like with everything in the Constitution, it shouldn't be an easy process. You don't want the power mongers to grab hold of the strings and do whatever they want that easily either.
And you don't want the current legislature to ensure that they stay in power. You need to have rules that they can't get around. From the nature of man, we may be sure that those who have power in their hands will not give it up while they can retain it.
That is such a key statement. Matter of fact, I'm going to do something here that that was the wrong thing to do.
Shall I continue?
I'm actually going to print that screen because that is such a powerful statement. And for those of you who are watching, where did my other earpiece go? There it is. This is so important because this is a key component about human nature.
Something you and I have been talking about quite a bit lately.
Yes. Human nature, and the reason why we've talked about it is I got into a discussion with someone not long ago, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we've got a lot to do here, but and he says to me, well, the Constitution needs to be updated. And I said, well, if you mean getting rid of the 17th, the 16th Amendment, I agree. Otherwise, I don't. He goes, no, it's too antiquated, blah, 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 blah. I said, and my response was, well, liberty and tyranny doesn't change, based on his argument. He's, and then I said, you have to understand, it takes into account something very important, human nature. And the guy got all red in the face, veins popping out. That's a BS answer. Human nature has nothing to do with it. I printed this for him. But human nature is everything. The entire discussion is about human nature. And when we talk about human nature, not just what's on the surface, but our inherent ability to walk down the wrong path as human beings quite a bit. And tyranny, it is human nature for some people to, rather than be good leaders, be tyrants. For example, human nature is everything in this conversation. And human nature, what it goes hand in hand with is our rights. Human nature and natural rights. This is what it's all about. And, human nature is the enemy of natural rights. If we allow it not to just, how do you have an orderly society if you don't put checks against human nature?
Continuing.
Sorry, I saw that from Mason. I had to say something, and I agree, and I agree with largely agree with your fondness of George Mason. He's absolutely one of the best of our founding fathers, but I still lean towards Madison. But anyway, all right, go ahead. Just a tad more.
On the contrary, we know that they will always, when they can, rather increase it, their power. If the southern states therefore should have 3/4 of the people of America within their limits, the northern will hold fast the majority of representatives. 1/4 will govern the 3/4. Talk about a prescient prediction. This is exactly what led to the air quotes Civil War. Mm-hmm. You had a new Republican Party comes into office without a majority and decides they're going to implement single party rule going forward. The southern states will complain, but they may complain from generation to generation without redress. It's exactly what happened, people. The tariff of abominations. The southern states were getting penalized by the northern states imposing tariffs on them. They fought this thing to nullification for decades, and it ended up in the air quote Civil War. What it ended up in was secession and a war of actual aggression, a war of northern aggression, but that's a different conversation. Unless some principle, therefore, which will do justice to them hereafter, shall be inserted in the Constitution, disagreeable as the declaration was to him, he must declare he could neither vote for the system here nor support it in his state. foreshadowing the fact that he would be one of the major anti-federalists unless he gets all the protections that we need in that Constitution to ensure that a 1/4 can't govern the 3/4. He will never argue for passage of this Constitution.
There's a number, and when he refuses to sign it, he's one of 3 that were there for the whole convention who refuses to sign it. He has a list. It's not just one thing. He has a list of reasons, and that was among them.
And he ended up being correct. He's one of the ones who pushed for what's called the bill. We call the Bill of Rights. Madison, of course, said it's redundant because the enumeration doctrine means that this new federal government doesn't have any power to do these things. We're going to tell
them they were both right for different reasons. and I will admit, Madison, as a member of the House of Representatives, once, and I think it was probably Mason who convinced him of it, became the champion of the Bill of Rights once it got into the legislature.
Strong objections have been drawn from the danger to the Atlantic interest from new Western states. Ought we to sacrifice what we know to be right in itself, lest it should prove favorable to the states which are not yet in existence? If the Western states are to be admitted to the Union as they arise, they must, he would repeat, be treated as equals and be subject to no degrading discriminations.
This is interesting because what he's basically saying is just because you're the original states doesn't make you the nobility. You're not high and mighty over everybody else because you started this thing. Everybody comes in and they are right there. Isn't that what this whole country is about?
It's what it's supposed to be. But, you know, I live here in New England and I know the attitude's quite different here. And it always has been. Yeah, it always has been. It's from the Ivy League schools to basically perpetuate the government. It has always been, you know, a New England dominated country, and they flaunt it and take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And he's saying we need to have principles to keep that happening.
Right.
They will have the same pride and other passions which we have, and will either not unite with or speedily revolt from the Union if they are not in all respects placed on an equal footing with their brethren. That is such an important thing. People, note here, is one of the founding fathers saying, if we don't treat states fairly, they will speedily revolt. It was not a perpetual union. The right to secede was implied. They all knew this at the time. And he just made that really crystal clear.
Mm-hmm. And there's a number of times during this convention and even discussions in the first Congress about this. Hamilton, even though he was wrong on what he was saying, he also, when he was arguing for certain things early on, he said, mainly debt, he believed that this country should have perpetual debt. Bad idea. But his reasoning, one of his reasons was, if we don't have a united debt, in other words, all the states' debt be included in the federal debt, I know this is a sore point for you for sure, then states will be more willing to secede. But if they have part of that debt, then they'll know they have to pay their debt before they leave. So it'll hold together the union better. That was his argument. Not that I'm suggesting he was right in that argument, but even Hamilton early on was suggesting that secession was not only something that the states could do, but that they would do if we didn't make sure that this union was everything that they hoped and dreamed it should be.
And they all knew that if you can accede to a contract, you can secede from it.
Yeah. This is a social contract. The states are the parties. And if they believe that the contract's been breached, bye-bye. They understood that. And secession for the war between the states was not the first time that secession was threatened. It happened a number of times. There was a number of states that threatened to secede over economic reasons during the first, 20, 30 years of this country. So understand that it was definitely in the conversation and understood that this is a voluntary union.
Yeah, a number of the northern states met in Massachusetts in 1814 and actually took a vote on secession. They basically had to do with the War of 1812, and they were so reliant on transatlantic commerce that they were getting starved. It has been said they will be poor and unable to make equal contributions to the general treasury. He did not know, but that in time they would be both more numerous and more wealthy than their Atlantic brethren.
That is brilliant. That's exactly right. You guys are talking about, well, of course they are at first, but given time, like the rest of you. So it's a very, 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 very good observation.
The extent and fertility of their soil made this probable, and though Spain might for a time deprive them of their natural outlet for their productions, yet she will, because she must, finally yield to their demands.
Remember, I was talking about New Orleans being under control of Spain? That's what he's referring to. Anyway, all right, go ahead.
He urged that numbers of inhabitants, though not always a precise standard of wealth, was sufficiently so for every substantial purpose. For this house, the people's house, representation should be based on population, period. All right, Mr. Williamson. This is Hugh Williamson, North Carolina, right? Yep. He was for making it the duty of the legislature to do what was right and not leaving it at liberty to do or not do. He's got a lot more faith in Congress critters than I do. He moved that Mr. Randolph's proposition be postponed in order to consider the following: that in order to ascertain the alterations that may happen in the population and wealth of the several states, a census shall be taken of the free white inhabitants and 3/5 of those of the other descriptions on the first year after this government shall have been adopted, and every year thereafter, and that the representation be regulated accordingly. Imagine that, Doug, a census every year.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say something about that. Yeah, no. Especially the bureaucratic mess it's become.
Mr. Randolph agreed that Mr. Williamson's proposition should stand in the place of his. He observed that the ratio fixed for the first meeting was mere conjecture, that it placed the power in the hands of that part of America which could not always be entitled to it, and this power could not be voluntarily renounced. And that it was
what he's saying when he says agree to Mr. Williams' proposition to stand in the place of his. Remember, he said 10 years. He said, "Oh yeah, no, I like this 1 year idea."
And that it was consequently the duty of the convention to secure its renunciation when justice might so require, by some constitutional provisions. If equality between the great and small states be inadmissible, because in that case unequal numbers of constituents would be represented by equal number of votes, was it not equally inadmissible that a larger and more populous district of America should hereafter have less representation than a smaller and less populous district? If a fair representation of the people be not secured, the injustice of the government will shake it to its foundations.
Now, I want folks to notice something here that you may not realize. Mason and Randolph are from the same state. They're both Virginians. Randolph is taking the big state mindset here. Mason, not so much. So that's what's really fascinating here. I want you guys to key in on is this is a battle within the same state here during this debate. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and when we get done with this series, we're going to have to get into the Virginia and New York ratification debates at those conventions. And there's some pretty good literature on that. And it's the same debates or similar debates are going to come up again and again.
Yeah, and for those of you looking for reading material, the best ratification debate to read is Virginia, and New York and North Carolina are tied for a close second. So if you really want to understand the battles over ratification, those three, Virginia, New York, and North Carolina, are the ones to read. North Carolina, by the way, being the second to last state to ratify and holding off until there's a Bill of Rights.
What relates to suffrage is justly stated by the celebrated Montesquieu as a fundamental article in Republican governments. If the danger suggested by Mr. Governor Morris be real, of an advantage being taken of the legislature in pressing moments, it was an additional reason for tying their hands in such a manner that they could not sacrifice their trust to momentary considerations. That is straight out of Montesquieu, too.
Mm-hmm. That's probably the best statement in this soliloquy by Edmund Randolph.
Congress have pledged the public faith to new states that they shall be admitted on equal terms. They never would or ought to accede to on any other. There's that word, accede. You're acceding to the contract, therefore you can secede. Like the word accede means to voluntarily enter into a contract. The census must be taken under the direction of the general legislature. The states will be too much interested to take an impartial one for themselves. What he's saying is, if you leave it up to the states to tell you how many people live there, you may not get an honest answer. Sort of like how California counts illegal aliens.
That's great.
I can't wait for that 2030 census. And we better get that right and not count illegal. Count citizens only, please. General Pinckney insisted that blacks be included in the rule of representation, some South Carolina, equally with the whites, and for that purpose, that the words 3/5 be struck out.
Well, of course, that Southerner wants them to be counted fully, boy. All those different slaves all over the place, that would give them all kinds of legislative power. Here, here, to the South. Meanwhile, the North's like, yeah, no.
Mr. Gary thought that 3/5 of them was, to say the least, the full proportion that could be admitted. This ratio, this is Gorham, this ratio was fixed by Congress as a rule of taxation. Okay, here's what it comes down to. It's the trade-off. We've talked about this before. The 3/5 compromise was basically to say, okay, taxation is based on population, and so representation is based on population. So it's to your advantage to count more blacks, but you also are going to have to pay more taxes. They compromised at 3/5 as a way of balancing that. And Gorham's going back to that. And that 3/5 rule came from the Articles of Confederation Congress. Then it was urged by the delegates representing the states having slaves that the blacks were still more inferior to freemen. At present, when the ratio of representation is to be established, we are assured that they are equal to freemen. The arguments on the former occasions had convinced him that 3/5 was pretty near the just proportion, and he should vote according to the same opinion now. This isn't being brought up the first time. This is established law under the Articles of Confederation. Mr. Butler insisted that the labor of a slave in South Carolina was as productive and valuable as that of a freeman in Massachusetts, that as wealth was the great means of defense and utility to the nation, they were equally valuable to it with freemen, and that consequently an equal representation ought to be allowed for them in a government which was instituted principally for the protection of property was itself supported by property.
Boy, talk about twisting what you're really thinking in your mind to fit your narrative.
I like the fact that it says in a government which is instituted principally for the protection of property, which is true.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the protection of property, security of our natural rights, absolutely.
George Mason, well, natural rights for some, not for all, I guess, apparently, according to Butler.
Mason. Butler's Georgia, right? If I remember properly.
Where's Butler, South Carolina?
Oh, South Carolina. Okay. Yeah, I knew it was one of the two. All right, go ahead.
George Mason could not agree to the motion, notwithstanding it was favorable to Virginia, because he thought it unjust. It was certain that the slaves were valuable, and as they raised the value of land, increased the exports and imports, and of course the revenue would supply the means of feeding and supporting an army, and might, in case of emergency, become themselves soldiers. As in these,
once again, the ability to see the future by Mason blows me away so many times. He has such an understanding of the consequences of their actions, cause and effect, and what we're going to see in the future. He is definitely. I understand why he's your favorite. But anyway, go ahead.
As in these important respects, they were useful to the community at large. They ought not to be excluded from the estimate of representation. He could not, however, regard them as equal to freemen, and could not vote for them as such. He added, as worthy of remark, that the southern states have this peculiar species of property over and above the other species of property common to all the states.
So it's peculiar species of property. That was his way of saying slavery. And often you'll also hear a number of them, including Mason, call it a peculiar institution of slavery, or peculiar institution. And it's a fascinating use of the word.
Well, it is peculiar, but to think it's such a southern institution, a vast majority of the northern banking system was based on lending to Southerns, and with the slaves being used as collateral.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge part of the entire financial system. All the states participated in that. But by the time the Civil War broke out in 1860, the estimated property value of all the slaves in the South exceeded that of any other industry in the country. And it was used as collateral for vast amounts of borrowing, lending, you name it. It facilitated commerce.
So while in the North you were seeing anti-slavery laws beginning to bubble up, deep down they were the enablers.
Very much so, financially. Mr. Williamson reminded Mr. Gorham that if the Southern states contended for the inferiority of blacks to whites when taxation was in view, the Eastern states on the same occasion contended for inequality. He did not, however, either then or now, concur in either extreme, but approved of the ratio of 3/5. On Mr. Butler's motion for considering blacks as equal to whites in the apportionment of representation, Massachusetts, no. Connecticut, no. New York wasn't there. New Jersey's a no. Pennsylvania's a no. Delaware's an aye. Maryland's a no. Virginia's a no. North Carolina's a no. And South Carolina and Georgia are ayes. So the no's win the day. Blacks are not equal. 3/5 compromise is still in place. Governor Morris said that he had several objections to the proposition of Mr. Williamson. 1, it fettered the legislature too much. 2, it would exclude some states altogether who would not have a sufficient number to entitle them to a single representative. 3, it will not consist with the resolution passed on Saturday last authorizing the legislature to adjust the representation from time to time on the principles of population and wealth or the principles of equity. It's a lot there. If slaves were to be considered as inhabitants, not as wealth, then the said resolution would not be pursued. If as wealth, then why is no other wealth but slaves included? These objections may perhaps be removed by amendments. This goes back to apportionment based on tax receipts, or based on the wealthier states getting more representation. His great objection was that the number of inhabitants was not a proper standard of wealth. The amazing difference between the comparative numbers and wealth of different countries, rendering all reasoning superfluous on the subject. Numbers might with greater propriety be deemed a measure of strength than of wealth. Yet the late defense made by Great Britain against her numerous enemies proved in the clearest manner that it is entirely fallacious even in this respect. Interesting argument by Morris. Mr. King thought there was a great force to the objections of Governor Morris. He would, however, accede to the proposition for the sake of doing something. Good arguments, but I'm going to vote against you.
Well, because what else do we do here? We got to do something.
Mr. Rutledge contended for the admission of wealth and the estimate by which representation should be regulated. The Western states will not be able to contribute in proportion to their numbers. They should not, therefore, be represented in that proportion. The Atlantic states will not concur in such a plan. He moved that at the end of the years after the first meeting of the legislature and every blank years thereafter, or every years thereafter, the legislature shall proportion the representation according to the principles of wealth and population.
So A, the census should be every year, and B, wealth is a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, notice what Rutledge said here. This is the way to make sure the Western states don't, get too uppity, even if they get big population numbers.
Yeah, we saw this play out in real time. The New York banks did everything they could to destroy other Western banks throughout history.
Yeah, I'm sure Wells Fargo really ticked them off.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. And it's funny because, for the California gold rush and the Nevada silver rush, that there were some Western banks that had quite a bit of wealth. The New York banks did not like that at all. Mr. Sherman thought the number of people alone the best rule for measuring wealth as well as representation, and that if the legislature...
I apologize for interrupting, and I was just thinking, and the London banks really hated all of it that was going on. Never mind. All right, go ahead.
Don't send me down that rabbit trail, because I'll give you there's an actual point in time where the actual balance of power from the City of London banks moved to Wall Street, and that's called World War One. Basically, J.P. Morgan got paid 1% on everything we sent to Europe when we're staying out of the war, and basically the European banks were broke after World War One. Wall Street became the dominant banking system at that point in time. We are not ruled by the City of London people. Don't get me started on the Rothschilds either. By the time World War One wrapped around, the two most powerful members of the London Rothschild family weren't interested in banking at all. One was into horticulture. 4 generations later, wealth always dissipates.
Oh, I haven't heard this from you, and I'm thrilled to hear what you're saying. I've been arguing similar things, although not exactly like that, for a while.
Yeah,
anyway, all right, go ahead.
Rothschilds were one of the 5 most powerful banks. They were the most powerful of the 5 major banking families in London throughout the 1800s.
About what would you say, about the 1840s? Was it when they really kind of pulled it?
They really, well, the Napoleonic Wars put them to number 1 because they made them, basically they had better information. We're able to basically do a trading places, sold all their stocks, and then bought on the cheap when everyone else panicked. They really got organized. Remember, the Rothschild banks were 5 banking families spread throughout Europe. There were 5 Rothschild major banks. And there were so many wars during the 1800s that by the end of that century, European wars, there were really only 2 Rothschild banks standing, London and I believe the London branch, the French branch, and the German branch still mattered. It all changed. But remember, with all these wealthy families, you see it by the 3rd generation, you've had so much inheritance, dispersal of the wealth, that it always happens. One generation to build it, a second one to exploit it, and a third to waste it. And that's happened throughout history. Rothschilds were not that much different. They still remain a very powerful banking family, at least one of the branches, but the rest of them are pretty insignificant. And
the free market system in America, though we never really embraced a pure free market, it was more free market than the rest of the world, definitely was making its impact. And we became the shining beacon in the world regarding that. Of course, there's all kinds of sub stories underneath that. So I don't want us to get too deep because we need to get back to this.
Yeah, just
but we did see for lack of a better way of saying it, a shift in financial power for sure.
Yeah, and what you talked about, the more free market system we had, that led to a huge middle class with everyday people having more savings, not just the wealthy elite. What that did in the banking world is Rothschilds were merchant banks, and they would give loans to businesses and governments. What we had is what basically we call retail deposit banks, and they end up having more of the money than the merchant banks did.
And that's number one customer, you and I.
Yep. They would be obliged to estimate it by the numbers. He was at first for leaving the matter wholly to the discretion of the legislature, but he had been convinced by the observations of Mr. Randolph and Mr. Mason that the periods and the rule of revising the representation ought to be fixed by the Constitution. Let's see, how are we doing on time here? That's probably a pretty good place to stop right there, Doug.
Yeah. Now we're about an hour and 20 minutes in, and we usually try to stop somewhere between a little over an hour and an hour and a half. So let's do that. And as you showed when you went down the screen, there's still a lot more discussion for this particular day. What day were we on? What day are we leaving off on? July?
I believe we are on July 11th.
July 11th. Okay.
And Sherman was the last to speak. But there's some good stuff coming on here. Really what they're debating is, should the guys with the biggest bank accounts have more apportionment in Congress, or should be in the House of Representatives, or should be by population? We know it ends up winning the day because wealth was never considered, but they were actually seriously considering that. And I'd like to remind people, and I've told this story before, that here in New Hampshire, the state Senate here was originally apportioned by tax receipts. The county I'm in, Rockingham County, was the wealthiest. It got more representation than the rural areas.
Right.
That lasted.
And you're right, and it's right there on the coast, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, this Portsmouth was a really, really good natural port. In fact, it rivaled Boston for a time in terms of trade during the colonial days. It was a very, very wealthy area. That's why
it rivaled. Let's see, if I remember properly, knowing my history, it rivaled Boston when it came to import export, and it rivaled Rhode Island when it came to smuggling.
Doug, nobody could beat Rhode Island for smuggling. Nobody could.
Yeah, but Portsmouth was in the conversation.
Yeah, it's funny to say that. I'll do this next week. The Governor John Langdon House. We're gonna have to when Rhode Island gets here, when New Hampshire gets to this convention, we're going to talk a little bit more about Governor John Langdon. I spent last couple of weeks. My mother-in-law about 2 weeks ago went over to the Governor John Langdon House, and he's a remarkable man. The house is gorgeous. I've got pictures from it. I literally could actually stand. If there was no wall right here, I could throw a baseball and hit that house. That's how close I am to it. Or maybe I might need a drive. Maybe I might need a driver, but it's literally just
a driver.
That's how much in the middle of historic Portsmouth I am.
Oh, very cool.
There's a few of those very famous houses we can walk to. Strawberry Bank Museum is baseball throw that direction, and so I've been seeing all the sites lately, and it's some gorgeous real estate, and they built well back then. And I don't know if people know this. This house I'm in is a little over 200 years old. I'm up here in the loft, my attic. These beams up there that you can see at the top, I can do pull-ups from them. Basically, have been there for over 200 years. So it's kind of cool being in a historic district. Although upkeep occasionally can be a challenge. But,
try living in the hills like I do.
The other thing about New Hampshire is, but your state isn't even 200 years old.
This is true.
The other thing about Portsmouth is that they've got this great inland waterway system, all these rivers, and these smaller American ships can get up and down these canals, and the bigger British ships of the line could not navigate this thinner waterways. One of the main reasons during the Revolutionary War that we're able to keep Washington supplied is because of the smaller American ships in those waterways. It was that great, and I've been up and down those, and it's really beautiful country 4 months out of the year. We're actually heading up to Vermont in the next few weeks to actually look at all the leaves falling.
I drove through Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern New York during the fall. I think it was late September in 2002, and it was awesome. It was breathtaking. That's the last time I've been through the area, though. I definitely need to get back out there again.
I was telling Doug before the show, we're a couple of weeks, we're going to drive up to Vermont for a couple of days. I haven't spent much time with them. Second part of the trip, we're going to go down again. I'll visit Newport, Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. And then next month, we're going to actually spend some time down on the coast of New Jersey. And see if I tell you exactly what town we're going to. I should have that on my calendar. No, I'm brilliant. I just said out of town. Interesting. But that'll be a fun trip. So I'll be doing shows from the road for a couple of weeks there. All right, fun. I told you that was going to be a fun episode today, huh?
I got
to play with my maps. I'm always happy when I get to play with maps. All right, everybody. DouglasVGibbs.com. Check out his work. He's been putting out a lot of stuff. And I've taken a couple of weeks off social media. I haven't been very active, but I will start getting active there. You can always find me right there. _hamster 1776. Please like, share, subscribe. Get more people watching this. We're getting a lot of viewership. It's growing. We appreciate it. I think it's a fun experience going through the original, hearing the original words of the founders. Got a lot more to go. We'll get through it. Until next time, everybody. Cheers.